Hey, what's up guys? So in the last video, I did a deep dive into dash cams as well as newer camera technology and their capabilities when it comes to capturing license plates. And we basically found that dash cams, yes, are able to capture license plates, especially in easier situations. There also seems to be three main limitations when it comes to dash cams capturing license plates. Number one, because they use really wide angle lenses to capture everything going on ahead of you, they're going to be limited as far as how far away they can capture plates, even if you're using really high resolution sensors. Number two, it can also be really difficult to freeze frame license plates when you're dealing with motion blur. And number three, when you're driving around in darker situations such as at dusk or even at night, the motion blur is going to be even worse. Plus you're dealing with some additional difficulties such as less light hitting the sensor or even extreme dynamic range issues with really dark roads ahead plus really bright headlights shining on the license plates. And after all that, I was like, hey, this is actually a pretty difficult situation to freeze frame license plates in all situations. In some situations, sure, you can do it, but in other situations, it's going to be difficult, even with kind of higher end tech. Now that said, after the video, I was thinking about it a little bit more, and some of you guys even mentioned, well, what about police license plate scanning cameras? How do those work? And I was like, of course. These guys have to do it, and they're using better technology than what we have in their dash cams. And I started taking a closer look at it, and sure enough, they're actually able to capture license plates in some of the situations where dash cams are not. And the reason that they can do this is that police license plate reading cameras are actually designed quite differently than our dash cams are. And so in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the two key differences between dash cams and police license plate readers, and also kind of what we can learn and how dash cam manufacturers could incorporate some of the same capabilities into our consumer grade dash cams. Now, as far as a quick background on police license plate reading cameras, you're typically going to see them referred to as things like ALPR systems for automatic license plate reader, or maybe NPR, like number plate recognition. And basically the idea is that these are specialized cameras installed on many police vehicles, and when the officers are driving around, the cameras are going to be scanning different license plates and looking up every plate in a database. And then if they get a specific hit on that plate, say, we know that car is stolen, or the driver has a suspended driver's license, or maybe there's a warrant out for the arrest of that driver, then the officer will actually get a notification in their car, and then they can pull over that car and, take a closer look there. Now, with these ALPR systems, there's actually three different types of cameras. You've got your fixed stationary cameras, say cameras that will be mounted on a pole. You've got semi-stationary ones, so say maybe a camera that could be mounted on a mobile speed sign, for example. And then finally, you have the mobile cameras, which are going to be installed on a police car. And these are the ones that we're going to be taking a closer look at, because this is going to be kind of the closest thing to what we use here as far as dash cams. Now, if we take a closer look here at these cameras, the first key difference that we'll find is that these cameras use not just one camera, but two. The first camera is going to have your traditional wide-angle lens, just like we have with our dash cams, but the second camera actually uses a telephoto lens, which is going to allow the camera to zoom in and capture those license plates farther away. Now, one example is the Motorola 4RE, which has an adjustable and rotatable wide-angle lens, plus a zoomed-in telephoto lens on top to capture the plates. And both of these cameras record at 720p. Another example is the Axon Fleet 3. This also uses two front-facing cameras, and the zoomed-in license plate camera actually records at 4K. And this zoomed-in lens is going to have a tighter 60-degree field of view. It's going to be able to capture 3 lanes of traffic, and the manufacturer says that it can capture license plates up to 50 feet away. There's also an optional third interior-facing dash cam, but for this video, we're going to be focusing on the two main front-facing dash cams. And from their marketing information, it looks like it's actually pretty effective. In fact, they posted a demo video of Ferraris on a track, and they were able to capture the license plates as the cars were going by at up to 140 miles an hour. And you'll notice on their laptop that they have not just one, but two images. You've got that first wide-angle image to show everything, as well as the secondary zoomed-in image to capture the license plate. And this is obviously going to be way more effective than anything we have with our single-lens dash cams. Now, that said, over the years, I have seen people actually experimenting with similar kind of multi-camera setups. For example, Dashmellow from the Dashcam Talk forums, years ago he mounted tiny telephotos onto a Mobius action camera. Another member there, Tony M, did the same thing as well, and he actually built a setup with multiple cameras, each one having a different lens attached. And so in addition to the normal wide-angle view we would get from the Dashcam, we would also get a second zoomed-in view, which makes it so much easier to read those license plates. Now, dashcam manufacturers, if they wanted to, could do the same sort of thing. And in fact, we already have many different dashcams on the market that have two different lenses. Typically, you're going to have your main dashcam that points out the front window, and then you have a second interior-facing dashcam to record the inside of the car. These are especially popular with rideshare drivers, driving for Uber and Lyft, for example. And so what if instead of having a secondary interior-facing wide-angle lens, we could flip it around somehow towards the front and have a second telephoto lens pointing out the front? Currently on the market, there's no dashcams that I know of that are designed this way, but I was really curious to just kind of build something similar and try it out and see, as a proof of concept, how well would this work? Well, the closest thing that I've got here in my closet, it's actually doing some testing here with one of the Next-based dashcams. They've got a connector here on the side that's going to allow you to connect a variety of different cameras. Instead of using the traditional rear-facing dashcam that would plug into the side and run to the back window and record behind you, or their interior recording dashcam that just plugs directly into the side of the front dashcam, instead I wanted to use their rear view camera that plugs into the side of the front camera like this, but it has a special telephoto lens here that's designed to zoom past your headrest, for example, and record everything going on back behind you. I always figured something like this could be really cool for, say, a convertible if your rear window goes down sometime. This way you still have that rear view camera, even without a rear window. Now, the HDMI connector here on the side of the camera, it's designed to only allow this camera to point backwards at the rear of the car. It's not reversible, so you can't point it forwards like this. And so for testing purposes, I just installed it backwards and then literally just tried hand-holding the camera on my windshield. And if you take a look at the footage, yes, there's a good amount of handshake here from me hand-holding it, but if we freeze frame it real quick, you can see that the telephoto lens here makes it way easier to read the license plate. And also keep in mind that this license plate camera, it's only 1080p, while the wide-angle dash cam that I'm testing with records in 4K. And this really highlights the importance of the lens itself to zoom in and capture plates, not necessarily focusing on just the image sensor, you know, if it's at 2K or 4K or max bitrate or whatever frame rate. Like, the lens itself is a really big factor here too. Anyway, this was looking really promising and I wanted to continue testing, and so this time I just took the dash cam and just handheld it on my dash to keep it a little bit more steady. And starting off, taking a look at some test results with moving vehicles, I found that when the license plates are really close, traditional dash cams can capture plates, but we already know that. The telephoto can capture them too, but it's not like we really need it in this case. However, when the cars start to get farther away, this is really where the telephoto becomes especially important. For example, if you take a look at the car in the next lane over here, the telephoto camera can grab the license plate, no big deal, but the 4K dash cam on the other hand, this is the best frame of footage I got. Maybe you can sorta make out some digits, but it's definitely not clear and legible. Next, let's take a look at a similar example, but this time a little bit tougher because the Tesla that's coming towards me never actually passes me. Instead, it kind of turns off down a side street. And if we take a look at the footage from the telephoto camera first, you'll notice that it's not perfect. It does leave me guessing a little bit, but it's still way better than if we take a look at the dash cam. This is the clearest frame of footage that I got from it, and you'll see that the license plate is just a mushy mess. I can't make out anything. And so the main takeaway so far is that this telephoto lens makes a big difference. And again, even a 1080p dash cam can outperform a 4K dash cam if it has a superior lens. And I would imagine if we start upping the resolution of the telephoto to 2K or 4K, it would do better still. This is actually the same reason why we're seeing phones now that have multiple cameras installed. You've got your wide-angle lens, your normal lens, as well as your zoomed-in telephoto. It's why photographers and videographers using DSLRs or mirrorless cameras have such a wide variety of lenses available. Different lenses really are important. Now that said, in my research, I did actually find some single-lens ALPR systems. I noticed that lens typically would be kind of more zoomed in. It wasn't the traditional wide-angle lens. For our applications as a dash cam, we definitely still need the wide-angle lens as our main one. We would just want this kind of license plate camera to be an additional secondary specialized lens, right? Not just the only lens. Next, moving on, let's take a look at some nighttime testing. So first off, testing with the car far away here, you can see that it works, but the license plates are blown out and illegible from my bright headlights. Now, I tried getting a little bit closer, and I still had the same issue. I also had some cars drive by, and I found that, yeah, motion blur is still an issue too. Now, this exact same situation worked great in the daytime, but not so much here at night. Now, something else I found is that when I switched to my running lights, now I could actually make out the plate on the zoomed-in camera. And so at this point, it seems to be more of an issue of exposure, not so much a distance limitation. Regardless, though, I tried getting a little bit closer, and I still had the same issue with the license plates being too bright. And I also had the same issue with motion blur. These cars driving by, I couldn't get their plates. Now, when I switch to my running lights again, the plate camera, you can see it works great here, but the wide-angle lens still can't read the plate. You'll also notice that with oncoming traffic, if I try to freeze frame the license plate, well, neither camera can capture that plate, including the telephoto. There's just too much blur here and not enough light. And then finally, getting super close to that car ahead of me, at this point now the plate camera can read the license plate even with the headlights on. It looks like the back of the car is big enough in the frame to make the camera automatically darken its exposure. The wide-angle camera, on the other hand, still can't read the license plate. Now, something that was interesting here is I had another car drive by, and if you take a look at the wide-angle camera, again, still too much motion blur like before, but with the license plate camera, you can almost read the license plate here. In fact, I think if I had the camera mounted on my dash and there were no engine vibrations or no vibration from my hand trying to hold it steady, I think it would actually be able to capture the license plate here. There is still a little bit of handshake that varies from frame to frame, but overall the faster shutter speeds with the darker exposure does seem to help freeze the license plate. And so it looks like recording at night is still possible here too. It's tougher, right, than recording in the daytime, but still possible. We've still got the same limitations, of course, as far as distance, but now motion blur is even worse, especially with the reduced amount of light. Plus, it looks like dynamic range becomes an even bigger issue because you've got, well, really dark roads ahead at night, plus really bright headlights shining on the license plate. Well, how do police ALPR systems get around this? Well, this, I guess, brings us to the key difference number 2 between our dash cams and police license plate cameras. And that is that most of these police license plate reading cameras actually have special infrared lights that shine out and help to illuminate the cars and the license plates as they go by. And if you take a closer look at the cameras, you'll see that they often have a bunch of infrared LEDs installed for this exact reason. And this is actually the same idea of why rideshare dash cams have infrared LEDs pointing inside the car. You can't see them with the naked eye, but it's going to allow the dash cam to record what's going on in the cabin at night and record the passengers. Without the IR LEDs, the cabin is going to be too dark, especially when there's no daylight or even any street lights to light up the inside of the car. And when you're driving around at night, out of your car, there's really only 2 main sources of light. Number 1, you've got your headlights, of course, and then number 2, it's just whatever ambient light sources are around, such as, say, street lights. But if we want to reliably capture your license plates at night, we need to make sure that we're able to capture not only ahead of us where our headlights are shining, but also off to the side where they're not shining, or areas where there's no street lights and it's just super dark outside. Now, in order to reliably capture license plates at night when there's really no light around, you're going to have to add light somehow, which is why most ALPR systems actually add these special infrared LEDs. Now, I'm sure most of us are not going to want to buy a bunch of external IR LEDs and install them all around our car like police officers do on their cars. We just want to buy a dash cam, a simple box we can stick on the windshield, plug it in, and it just kind of does what we need, right? So for testing purposes, I was curious about, okay, well, a lot of these cameras have IR LEDs built in. Can we use them to actually help? And doing a quick test here with the VFO T130's interior dash cam, it worked okay, just hand-holding it to the windshield and recording with only ambient light. However, when I turned on its infrared LEDs, I got a ton of reflections off the windshield, and so I'm finding that the IR LEDs actually cause more problems than they solve. And mind you, this is just with the few weak infrared LEDs designed to record passengers a few feet away, right? Not necessarily cars way up on the road ahead of you. Now, if we take a closer look at the Axon Fleet 3 here, for example, it's also a windshield-mounted dash cam, effectively, that doesn't have any infrared LEDs, presumably here for the same reasons. I tried to find some sample footage of this camera recording at night, but I didn't actually find any. All the sample footage that I found from it was only in the daytime. And taking a closer look at the FAQ on their website, they said that the Fleet 3 dual view camera is mounted behind the windshield and it's not IR illuminated. The Fleet 3 will read plates in low light conditions if the plates are sufficiently illuminated by ambient light sources or headlights. Fleet 3 is not expected to read plates in total darkness. In low light or nighttime conditions, we expect license plates that are illuminated by headlights to be detected and read accurately. Dedicated ALPR systems with active IR can read license plates in near complete darkness. And so for this reason, they acknowledge that their ALPR is worse than traditional ALPR at night. And so fundamentally, their cameras are doing the exact same thing that I was doing here in my testing, where you're relying on just ambient light sources or your headlights to light up the world ahead of you. Now, they did specify that if your headlights are shining on a plate, you should be able to capture it, something that I wasn't able to do with my dash cam. And so it looks like they're basically just doing some special processing to make sure that they can expose for the license plates. And it actually reminds me a lot of what I saw when I was doing some additional manual control testing with the GoPro at night, where I was cranking down the exposure to darken up the image and cranking up the shutter speed to freeze motion. Basically, I was prioritizing capturing the license plates, not necessarily the world around me. Now, what was interesting is I was Googling around a little bit more, and taking a closer look at the Motorola L5M, I found some nighttime sample footage that they posted from this ALPR camera. And if we take a look at its night footage, you'll notice that its zoomed-in camera is super dark, but it's exposing specifically to read license plates. You can't really see anything else, but if you want to capture plates, it definitely does the trick. They also showed a sample raising the exposure to brighten the image, and when they do this, they can capture the vehicle make and model, but not the license plate anymore. And so there are going to be some pros and cons here depending on how you manage the exposure. Now, this variable exposure thing kind of had me thinking about, like, well, what about HDR systems where they're specifically trying to capture a bright image and a dark image to combine them for improved dynamic range? Could you do something similar here? Well, I actually stumbled across an old video that uses exactly this technique. They're basically recording high-speed footage at night at 250 frames a second, and they're shooting lots of frames, some darker and some brighter. And between all these different frames, at least one of them should be able to capture the license plate. I'm noticing they're also shooting a flash too, by the way, and you'll see this where the plate suddenly gets much brighter. And it looks like they're kind of pulsing the flash on and off. And so sometimes the exposure gets darker and sometimes it gets brighter. And so basically it's going to give them a lot of different types of images, and they can just pick which one did the best at capturing the license plate. Now, this technique is going to work best with the flash, using your IR LEDs to help light up the plate, especially when things are really dark and you're trying to shoot at super high frame rates, right? But nonetheless, I think you could kind of take some of this same sort of idea and apply it to a dash cam or a windshield-mounted ALPR system where you're doing kind of variable exposures. You can do brighter and darker as needed and maybe flip between them, or maybe just focus specifically on darker exposures. Again, if you're designing something specifically for capturing license plates, you're probably going to want to optimize the video capturing capabilities to fundamentally work a little bit different than what you would need for just a dash cam trying to record everything. Now, for our application, though, I think we should be able to get by with using just our headlights and without using infrared LEDs. And the reason I say that is, again, if you take a look at police cars, they have cameras that point off to the side where there's no headlight shining, pointing backwards, etc. And if we try to do something similar with our rear dash cam when there's no headlights pointing out that way, it's definitely going to struggle more than the front one. But if we're focusing on just a front-facing dash cam, I think the headlights should be able to cover us in the majority of situations. We just want to ensure that the dash cam is optimizing its exposure to record off of the headlights. Now, if you want to freeze frame motion at night, you're going to want a really sensitive camera, and so you're going to want something that does a really good job of seeing at night, especially when there's not a ton of light in the first place. Now, we could do something like a 4K sensor, which we know is going to do a good job of resolving details, but at night, the smaller pixels make it harder to absorb a ton of light and make out details, and so maybe we're going to want to use a bigger sensor. But then when you do that, the sensor becomes more expensive, and then you have to compensate by having a larger lens, especially if you want to maintain a larger aperture. So the camera is going to get bulkier, everything's going to get bigger and more expensive, and so it's all going to be a balance here between resolution and sensitivity here when we're trying to freeze frame stuff here at night. Again, I'm just kind of brainstorming, but I do think that it would be possible here if dashcam manufacturers wanted to create a dashcam that had a secondary camera specifically for capturing license plates. Either way, though, I think that the best approach here to capture plates, day or night, is really going to be having a second camera with a second telephoto lens. It's how police ALPR systems work, and it does seem to help us get around a lot of the limitations that we're running into when we're relying on single lens dash cams or GoPros, even high resolution ones with crazy fast frame rates or anything. It seems like the telephoto lens with the second camera is actually going to be making the biggest and really most dramatic difference here. And so next, let's talk about what would it be like if a dashcam manufacturer wanted to go ahead and implement a second camera specifically to capture license plates like this. Well, first off, how much would something like this cost? Well, now in the previous video, Tracy Goodlet had commented that he installs high-end security cameras for the government that can read license plates over 150 miles an hour, clear as day. Now, the camera alone is $13,000. Cheaper solutions are still over $1,000 for a camera. I also wanted to take a look at how much the Axon Fleet 3 is. They didn't post any pricing information on their website, but I did come across a police department invoice where they mentioned that the list price of the camera is $2,400 and the net price is just under $2,000. Plus there's a bunch of other charges for things like license fees and installation and an internet connection, etc. Now, obviously, we're not going to need all of that kind of stuff, and we could strip away maybe some of the features that we don't need because we're not police officers, right? But if we wanted to focus on just the license plate capturing capabilities, maybe we can get it down to like $1,000 like Tracy was mentioning, or less. Now, what about modifying the Nextbase 622 GW that I was using here for testing? I mean, it already has this telephoto camera like this. The issue of why we couldn't use it currently is just that the HDMI connector here on the side, it's not reversible, so I can't flip this dash cam and plug it in, but it would be pretty trivial to just rotate this 180 degrees, plug it into the side, and then sell it as an external license plate camera, you know? Well, the 4K dashcam itself retails for $400, and then this 1080p add-on dashcam is an extra $100, so we're looking at $500 total. Additionally, you can also get cheaper versions of this dashcam if you want to record, say, at maybe only 2K or 1080p, if you want to save on price. But let's say we really wanted to maximize the license plate recording capabilities, we'd probably want to opt for higher resolution options. Now, if we wanted to do something like, say, 4K for both cameras, right, I think it would be possible, but probably pretty tough. The closest thing that I see right now is the ThinkWare U1000 that does 4K for the front camera and then 2K for the rear camera. I'm also starting to see more and more dash cams that record at 2K for both cameras, like the VFO A229. A lot of the current integrated 2-channel dash cams are doing something like, say, 2K for the front camera and then 1080p for the interior-facing one, but to be fair, you don't need crazy high resolution to record something a few feet away. But you could do something like, say, 2K and 2K, for example. And 2K might be the best balance right now as far as both resolving capabilities and low light sensitivity, not to mention price. You could do something like 4K, 4K, but that would certainly drive up the price. You've got more processing power required. It's going to generate more heat. But if the demand is there, sure, a company could certainly build that. But speaking of demand, I wonder how well something like that would sell. I mean, speaking for myself, I would love to have a special dedicated camera just for recording license plates like this. I think it could be really useful. I'm sure a lot of you guys, the same would be true too. But something I've noticed is for people, if they want to pay for additional channels to get additional cameras, usually it's going to be to add an additional camera angle that you don't already have. So let's say you've already got your main front-facing dash cam. Maybe for the second channel, you'd want to do a rear-facing dash cam to record behind you, or maybe a third channel to record the inside of the car. In my car, I actually run a 4-channel setup to record the front, the rear, as well as left and right. Now, to be fair, there isn't currently the option in the first place to add a dual front-facing camera like this, to have a second camera focusing on license plates, but I do wonder if this was available, people, would they think to themselves, like, why do I need a second front-facing dash cam? I already have a front-facing dash cam. I'd rather spend the money on maybe a rear or interior-facing dash cam. That seems to be really popular nowadays, you know? But I wonder, how popular would it be if the option was available in the first place? I also assume that it might be fairly expensive to add the second camera, and you may want to consider also adding image stabilization, especially when you've got a telephoto lens that's going to be vibrating while you're driving. Image stabilization would be especially important here for this telephoto one. And so I kind of wonder, like, how would it work as far as desirability and cost? I mean, you could do it, but I'm just kind of thinking. But again, I'm just a tester. I'm a reviewer. I'm not a dash cam manufacturer. It's not up to me to build the stuff or sell it. You know, I'm just sitting here brainstorming and just thinking aloud while we're playing with different ideas, right? But if your priority is capturing license plates, it really seems like so far the best way that you can do it is to have a second telephoto lens to zoom in and capture plates. This seems to be beneficial both in the daytime and the nighttime, and I'm sure there's a reason why police that actually rely on license plate reading cameras are designing their cameras this way. This seems to be a much more dramatic improvement compared to any optimizations we could do with a single wide-angle lens, whether you're wanting to bump the resolution, right, higher resolution, or increase the sensitivity with like a Starvis 2 sensor, or any of that kind of stuff that we could do. The big dramatic improvement that I'm hoping for seems like it would really be best achieved by having a second camera with that telephoto lens. But anyways, that's just my thoughts after some additional testing and research that I've been doing here over the past couple days. Let me know your thoughts as well. Would you like a dash cam that offered a second optional camera like this? Would you use it? And I'm curious, how much extra would you pay for something like that? $100? $200? Would that be reasonable? Would it be reasonable if the dash cam becomes bigger and bulkier, right, with the bigger lens and additional cooling that's necessary? So I'm kind of curious, like, how important is something like this for you? So let me know down in the comment area. If you'd like to finally see my recommendations for all the best dash cams that are currently available on the market, check the link down in the video description that goes over my top recommendations for best dash cams that are currently available. And yeah, woo! That was a lot, but that was fun. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you guys are all doing great, and I'll see you in the next video.